All right, you're on.
We're on. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sasquatch Trail Runners RunVenture Facebook Live series. I'm so sorry about the technical glitches. They were on my end. Ian Golden has put on his RG cap and is totally fixed it. And he got things up and running through their StreamYard app. So hopefully this is going out live to both the Trails Collective Facebook page and the Sassquad Trail Running Facebook page. So Ian, thank you so much for getting us back up and running.
Totally, yeah. Thanks for making the time still on your vacation, and to your family out there in the background, helping out or plugging in.
Nothing like a good old troubleshoot to get things going on a Wednesday night.
Yep. And
so let me give us a little bit of introduction to Sassquad Trail Runners, and I'm going to read Ian's bio, and then we're going to jump into this interview. So also along the way, if you're on Facebook, you can join the live chat on either page. We'll be able to see the comments, and I can read those questions that you might have for Ian, and it's going to be an interactive time during the interview. So my name is Kim Levinsky. I'm the owner and race director for Sassquad Trail Running. We are a trail running group in New Jersey. We put on events that we love to call them trail parties all around the state. Our next event is on May 1st. It's the Thunder Chicken Squatch at Stoke State Forest in Branchville, New Jersey, which is in Sussex County. You can register on ultrasignup.com to run or hike 17 miles or 7 miles. And then after that, we are down at the Burlington County Fairgrounds on the end of June, the last Sunday in June, for the Midnight Squatchapalooza. You can sign up to run or hike 12 hours, 6 hours, 3 hours, or a 5K. You can learn more about our events by going to sasquadtrailrunning.com. So the reason you are all here, and thank you so much for your patience, we have Ian Golden is joining us tonight. I'm going to read his squatchy introduction here to set the stage of what we are going to be enjoying tonight. So Ian is the founder of the Trails Collective and the race director for Newt Racing. He's also the owner of Finger Lakes Running Company, which is a running store in Ithaca, New York. So I want to tell you about the Trails Collective. It was launched in February of 2020, provides regional coverage of trail events, updates, volunteer opportunities, links to entities forming the collective, such as coaches, shops, gears reviews, an event calendar with mapping integration, communication message boards, and multiple video channels celebrating all the above. So Ian and his team have been highlighting countless events that have been going on the East Coast. He has a weekly rundown. If you've not subscribed to that on YouTube, get on their channel, the Trails Collective. There's a weekly rundown of all things happening with not only trail races, but also FKTs that are being set by athletes all around the tri-state, New England, and up and down the East Coast. Newt Racing, his trail racing company, hosts over a half a dozen events in New York, including the Breakneck Point Trail Runs and the Cuyahoga Trails 50. Those both events are coming up. They're on ultrasignup.com. I think they're both sold out, right, Ian?
They are, with pretty long wait lists at the moment.
Yeah, those events sell out really quickly. A couple more things about Ian. He ran competitively at Ithaca College, which is in New York. He was the only two-time All-American and the first NYSC/TC champion in both cross-country history, and he was the first top distance runners for the cross-country and track and field programs during his time at Ithaca. And a fun fact, which I just learned, probably those of you who know Ian well already knew this, but I learned this, that he ran for election to the U.S. House to represent New York's 23rd Congressional District, which I did not know that. So that's a fun trivia fact that we have for Ian. So Ian, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Totally, except for whatever person on the Facebook thread gave us that angry face up there. There's like, what are you doing? Come on, we just started. Give us a chance.
Come on, it's good to be here. Just got going. We're 4 minutes into this.
I know. Gosh.
I don't know. It could have been Trent. I don't know if it was Trent Swanson. He's trolling already. What do you think?
It's possible. It's possible.
So, Ian, let's jump into this. Tell us about your history as a runner. You've been running for a long time. You ran competitively. How did you first get into running and then trail running?
Let's see. I started, my first thing was, I grew up a competitive swimmer. I probably started swimming, I don't know, or being a competitive swimmer probably like age 6. And I think around age 16, where everybody else grew and I didn't, I think that kind of the writing was on the wall that this wasn't really going to be it. And so I moved into running around that time. And so started, I think, running competitively around 6th or 7th grade. And so that's just kind of how it went. I really enjoyed being active. I really enjoyed the team angles and the connections and relationships. And so that was kind of the start of it, I suppose. Yeah.
And what made you want to run competitively in college? Because that, you just can't wake up senior year and decide you're going to do that. What drove you to, seek out that opportunity?
It was not my plan to run competitively in college. I had gone to the, I think, initial weekend up at Ithaca College, and I think there was a friend, Mike Pulowski, who was a team runner at the time, came and I think just talked to everybody who was in there for the that weekend. And I don't know, there was some appeal there, and they just mentioned they were going to go on a group run, and I thought, well, I might as well go on a group run, and just joined them, and that was that. But it was not the plan to keep running after high school.
Okay. And how was it running competitively? Did you enjoy your college experience?
I did enjoy my college experience. Yeah, I think probably I really need to be kind of busy, I think, all the time. And I think I remember the first couple of weeks at college or at Ithaca, not really having a schedule, not really knowing anybody. Like, I just hated having the downtime. And so I think not only did running on the teams offer the sense of community and friendship and connection, but it kind of filled the time. And I was also in a pretty solid academic major, which required quite a bit of work. And I just felt like it also allowed me to just kind of fill up the time and maximize it. And that's kind of how I functioned best. So, but I really did enjoy my time running in college. And thankfully, our coach was, I think, open enough to allow us to really run the trails around Ithaca College in Ithaca. And so I think that really exposed me more deeper into trail running. And that's really what I loved. And I don't know if I don't think it probably translated into making us better collegiate runners, but it sure, I think, shaped where I would go from there. And I very much loved it.
Okay. Now, before we springboard into what's happening after college, I'm going to pass you this question from Ryan Thorpe. I don't know if you saw it already in the chat. Ryan Thorpe wants to know, who has the best hair in ultra running, and why is it Jay Lamos?
Yeah, just because Jay Lamos. Well, that's a good. I just instinctively think of others before myself, and Jay really has nice hair, and I can have a very, I think, visual of him just kind of maybe occasionally doing that with his hair and maybe like pulling it back, and it belongs in, I don't know, some sort of like Dove commercial or something like that. It's very luxurious. But I suppose, if I don't want to shortchange my own hair, it really comes in pretty thick and curly. And I was actually having a discussion in the kitchen this afternoon with my oldest of 3 daughters, and she just got back from going on a run on her own, which was great. And it was kind of sleety, snowy, rainy stuff up here. And she just went out for 3 miles. She's 12. And I was just getting back with our toddler and walked in, and then she walked in not shortly after. And then she came into me and she was just like, I don't get my hair. Like, what's going on with my hair? And she's got some curls, kind of waves in the middle, and then it like straightens out at the back or at the bottom or whatever. And she's not so sure what to make of it. But I think she's got some of those curls coming in, and we'll just see where that goes. But hair was on the conversation table today.
Jay Lamos just came to our race 2 weekends ago, and I did witness firsthand the flow. He's got some flow going on.
He does. Yeah. So good question, Ryan. Good question.
Thank you, Ryan. Keep them coming. We'll continue to feed them here to Ian. Okay, so after you finished running competitively in college, what's the story with what came next? When did Finger Lakes Running Company start? I know Trails Collective just happened. So walk us through the timeline of what happened after college.
So my academic program, I studied occupational therapy for my undergraduate and graduate work. And my graduate about year and a half was mostly field work or kind of immersion experiences. And so I used this as a chance to really move around, and with some really nice facilities as well. But I was in LA for a bit, and then Albuquerque for a bit, for a stint. And then I was over in Scotland for a bit. And at the time, my girlfriend through my grad years was a pretty incredible runner. She was one of Jack Daniel's ladies and was just a really amazing runner. And at the time, Jack was applying for a position as coach with the University of Hawaii. And she was assuming she just stay coached by him. And so she said, if you'll go to Hawaii, I'll go to Hawaii. And from my vantage point, I was like, yeah, sure, I'll go to Hawaii. And so she took a full ride out there, and I headed out there directly from Scotland to Hawaii after I finished my program, and just started getting into, or continued on with trails, living out on Oahu, and just really loved it. And at that point, I think I had signed up for MMT, or Massanutten, as my first ultra, or my first race out of college. And I had the opportunity, I think in that interim, the first Hurt 100 was going down, and not really knowing how that all went, but it was in my relative backyard at the time, or kind of my home trails at that point. I just showed up and asked if they needed any help. And they said the leader, who was Luis Escobar, could use a pacer, and he'd probably be back through in the next loop around 60 miles, whatever time that was. And I didn't know what that entailed. But I showed up and jumped in with him, and ran or covered 40 miles with him through that night, and came back to pace him at his, I think, second or third Hurt as well. But I think that was somewhat of the first immersion into actually experiencing ultra. And that's kind of where it went from there. But so it's in Hawaii for a bit, Seattle for a bit, and Seattle was great. I did some coaching out there for a high school cross country team in Lake Washington, and I was working before I had my OT licensure at a New Balance store downtown, and was still doing some of the trail events, and fell into some of the community that was around at the time, the Seattle Running Company, which was owned and operated by who's still a pretty good friend, Scott McCoubrey, who was kind of at I guess he's kind of in the Horton generation, where they were really that, I think, second generation into trail and ultra, and really at the heart of the community. So at that time, the Seattle Running Company had individuals working for it who would go on to become just some of the top names in that generation when I was getting into it. So Scott Jurek was there, and then he had set off, still connected, but doing his own physical therapy thing. Hal Kerner worked there. Chrissy Mail worked there, and several other just really fast, like ultra runners. And so because I didn't work at that store, but I was kind of in that periphery and got to know some of those faces and be embedded in some of that. And that also, I think, left an impression of trail and ultra and being in that early generation, so to speak, which was really quite wonderful. And then I lived in, and then I moved to Bend, Oregon. So I was in Bend for about 4 or 5 years, bought my first house out there, and just loved being in Bend. And I was just running just for fun here and there. I wasn't too focused on it. I was in Hawaii. I was trying to surf several days a week, and I was climbing up in an area of the North Shore once or twice a week, and then running some on the side. And then also in Oregon, I was more in the climbing gym during the winters, and in the summer we were playing pickup ultimate Frisbee. And so I wasn't really running that much, but it was always kind of in the periphery, and developed a friendship with the owner of a running store, also very, very in tune with his community out there, Teague Hatfield with the Foot Zone Bend, and applied for a job with him, but he didn't hire me. But I still kind of stayed in that mix, and I really valued and appreciated what he had created out there. And I thought it was really wonderful. And so that was probably from like 2000 to 2005. And then around that time, my, at the time, girlfriend and I went up and did a backcountry circuit up off the, in between Banff and Jasper. It was this backcountry hiking circuit up off the Icefields Parkway. And somewhere in the context of that 5 days, I just thought that it would be really fun to just choose a different path and open a running store. And so I think that was probably like in August, maybe. And by September, I had sold my house and was moving. In this case, I chose Ithaca to move back to just because I had some knowledge and comfort. And at the time, I was choosing between Flagstaff and Ithaca, and I just felt like I knew the Ithaca. I had more of a base here, and it was closer to our families. So back to Ithaca I came and opened up the Finger Lakes Running Company in 2006, and started putting on races a year or two after, and opened a couple more stores in the years after that.
Yeah, you've been all over the country and the world, really. You've been in Scotland and
a bit. Yeah,
that's incredible. I have a question about when you were in Seattle around all those, did you realize at the time that you were with some of the greats of ultra running, or was it kind of something where years had to go by and you're looking back and you can realize like, wow, that was really an incredible experience?
No, I don't think so, because I think that's some of the beauty I think about trail and ultra. Like, these were, I think, amazing individuals, but it was still so, I think, personal and humble, and the individuals and athletes were still so approachable and just like your friends, and it wasn't really people that were put on like pedestals that were more out of reach. And I think that that's something that's beautiful about the trail and ultra space. But I think that's kind of how it was, I think, at that time too. So I guess I was aware of how good these people were. And I think also more aware, because I had a decently competitive background, but I guess the better that you are, I guess the more aware you are of how much better other people are that are out there. And so I think having, again, a competitive background and getting into like the ultra scene, where these people were still kind of way out there, I guess it did make me appreciate just how tough these people were and kind of the difference of ultra running. But it was still very, I think, it wasn't pedestalage, I guess. So I was aware of it, but it was,
Right. All right, before we move on, Ryan Thorpe is asked, he says, fellow ultimate player turned ultra runner, what's your favorite throw, Ian?
My throw was whatever left my hand. I didn't really have any good throws. It was pickup games, and I was really not, I guess it was, I don't know, for many of you out there, if you're fast runners, maybe many of us arrived at running because we just weren't really that good at like a ball sport or something like that. So with ultimate, it was, I think, that way where I could probably outrun or was quicker than most people out there. My endurance was probably better, but my technique was awful. And so I don't think I had anything fancy in terms of a throw. I think I could just probably get down the field quicker than most other people.
There you go, Ryan. And Michael wants to know, no Boulder, Colorado. What's up?
No, I did pass through Boulder on several occasions. My girlfriend through undergrad was a Littleton, Colorado native. And so in undergrad, started going out there in the Denver area, and we went up to Boulder a bit. This would have been probably like 1999 through like 2003. And at that point, Boulder was still detached from Denver, and Denver was still detached from Colorado Springs, and let alone Fort Collins north of that. And then it was amazing in those years to just see the amount of development where that all became basically a single corridor. And so at that point, it seemed like Boulder was still kind of a cool island in and of itself and set apart. But no, I did not live in Boulder. And I think I was always aware that it would be a tough place to, I guess, move into, just based on how, I think, expensive it is.
Right. Awesome. Okay, so you moved back to Ithaca. You're at Ithaca. And you've started up the Finger Lakes Running Company. So what's happening once that gets off the ground? Is it immediately that you start organizing races, or does it take a couple of years to get your store up and running?
Opened Finger Lakes running in 2006. I think the first race I put on was in 2017 or 2007 rather. I think there's two races. There's one called the Catherine Valley Half Marathon, which may or may not still go. I handed it over to Vinny Capador of Happily Running a few years ago, and he may still put it on. And then also Virgil Crest, I think, was in 2007 was the first year. And I think the first year that I put on Virgil Crest, we started with just 100 and a 50 mile. And I think we were like the 21st or 22nd, I think, 100 in the country. And things were a little bit different. I think it was on that wave of growth, and it hadn't really exploded. I think within a few years later, there were probably like 60 hundreds, and then it was like 100 hundreds, and it kind of just kept going from there. And but I think that 2007 is when I started putting on the races, and I think that they were the first couple in the mix.
Awesome. Now the Breakneck Trail Run is an intense event. What's the backstory on that? How did you come up with the idea of it? How did that race come about?
Breakneck, yeah. So there was a time where I was traveling our region and really just running different networks, some down in your neck of the woods as well, and just really looking for what would just be a challenging and beautiful course. And I don't remember. There must have been something that cued me into Breakneck in the beginning, but I can't remember what that would have been. But I remember the first time out scouting it. I think I was out for, a few hours just exploring the area, and I was just like, this is awesome. And so proceeded, and it got off. And I think one of the, I guess I should check myself. I was about to say one of the cool things about Breakneck Point is just how aggressive the signature point is of Breakneck Point. Like it's
we should describe it for folks, because maybe some people listening, they've never heard of Breakneck.
Yeah, so Breakneck Point is an area basically right on the Hudson River between Cold Spring and Beacon, New York. And I think to this day, it's still one of the most popular day hikes in America, I believe. And so it's one that gets, like, if the first year, I think coming back down off that pitch while the race was going and seeing the area start to flood with people, it literally seemed like there might as well have been like there must have been a Bruce Springsteen concert, like at the top of the Breakneck Point, with the amount of cars and like people that were just flocking up there. And for all those of you Breakneck, it's on one of the rails out of New York City, and so it's awesome. So you can basically take the train right out of the city and hop off and head right up. But the trade-off is you also get people going up that are really out of their element, and you'll see some like high heels and like other people like going up this like good on you for being out there, but it's crazy. And so the pitch is, I forget what the gain is off the top of my head here, maybe gains like 1,200 feet in like 3/4 of a mile or something like that. And you've got some technical, literally like climbing pitches. And so to be able to put that in the context or in the course, in a race course, you just don't see that in the US. I think mostly from access, but also from liability and for good reason purposes. And so it was really cool to be able to get, I think, Breakneck off and knock on wood here at the table. And we will have an EMT up there on mid pitch like each year. I mean, it carries a lot of risk, but it's cool to be able to put on an event that has that in there.
That's awesome. Yeah, to put it in context, if you're familiar with Mount Tammany, think that traffic, but on a much, much, much steeper two hands, both feet scrambling up very, very steep and technical terrain. So that can give you a little context to it. So tell us about what other events do you have in your series for Red Newt Racing? I know there's a couple other ones.
Yeah, so Breakneck is the first in the lineup at the moment. It has a marathon and a half marathon. And I guess we'll move on from Breakneck, but I think Breakneck to me also, I think because it feels like play. I mean, it's just, I think, kind of fun. It's challenging. It puts you out of your comfort zone, so to speak. And it's not about just kind of who's the fastest. It's, I don't know, it is what it is. But Breakneck is the first up, at least this year, followed by Cayuga Trails, which is a 50K, 50 mile. And I integrated what used to be a separate race, which is Lucifer's Crossing. And that's now a 10K in the mix. And they all run based in Robert H. Treman State Park in Ithaca, which is just a really beautiful park with to maybe Trent will weigh in if he's watching, but as he I think mentioned in one of our Facebook threads today, has very signature old Civilian Conservation Corp and Works Progress Administration like staircases. So it's beautiful, but it takes you through just beautiful gorges with waterfalls and a good blend of some single track, double track. It's got, I think, like a 1.5 mile road each circuit, and then the new course. So the new course variation starting last year is a decent amount more difficult than it was in the early years when it was, I think, the U.S. National Championship for 6 years or so. And so when we had the, I don't know, like the Sage Canadays and the Amandas and the Samantha Littles and all like these fast times that were set, that was on an easier course. And so you get these fast people on an easier course. Like there's no times will never be, I think, touched again just because it's a tougher course than it used to be. But that's Cayuga Trails. Hopefully next year we'll be able to bring back Iron Mines, which will again go down in Northern Green in your neck of the woods there, maybe in April or May. And then Whiteface Sky Races was supposed to be July 31st, August 1st this year. At the moment, not running. If Essex County decides to allow Ironman Lake Placid to run, I may go back out that. We'll see. But that's one that will be back in the mix next year. And I'm hoping to vie also for the U.S. Mountain Running Championships for that one. So we'll see if we pick that up. And then traditionally, past few years, I put on Water Gap, 50K and 25K down in the based out of Milford, PA, in the flat part of the Delaware Water Gap Recreation area. I also have somewhat handed that off to Vinny for Happily Running. And then in that same time frame, we'll put on Virgil Crest again, which is 50K, 50 mile, 100K, 100 mile, and a relay in the mix as well. And that'll be in September.
That's awesome. Well, I know you and I are in the same boat of this past year has been, we don't really know what's happening from month to month with events. So if you've been frustrated, I can share the frustrations with you.
Yeah, right. It's just, it was already, not that it's not a, race directing is a wonderful thing. There's a lot of upsides and benefits to it. And it really is nice when it all comes together. But I guess the other piece is though, but it's still really stressful. I think there was some study done relatively recently on the most stressful occupations out there. And I think event management is one of the most stressful, occupations out there, literally. And I think it is what it is. And so, right. So now you add the COVID complexities and unknowns and all this extra layers to the mix. And yeah, it's more. So yeah.
Exactly. So I just chatted with some friends who were saying, man, we spent this last year just reinventing our entire race calendar. So, anyway, okay, I know we've got a question here popping up from Kaylin Hopkins. Hi, Kaylin. I imagine that you've been exposed to a wider audience of runners since starting the podcast. How, if at all, has your perception of trail and ultra running, the individuals and or the subcultures within ultra running changed? Whoa, deep question, Ian. Take a second to munch on that a little bit.
I guess that could be for either of us, right? I mean, that could be directed just as easily at you, Kim, right? Because your podcast is relatively newer. I mean, if you want to think on it, you can, but I suppose, that question is just as appropriate for you. All right, I'll start when you follow up. So I think, yes, to a wider audience. I really hope that Trails Collective does grow. But so far, I don't know how wide the audience is. I think there's so many more podcasts, so many more Facebook groups, so many more of everything that it's just tougher, I think, to break out at the moment. And so I don't know, I really don't know how many people are tuning into Trails Collective on a weekly basis. I see the numbers in terms of YouTube views and all that. And it's not a huge, so I hope it grows, but I don't know. So I don't know if it's necessarily changed. I think because I have a competitive background, it's been fun to put on some of the, like for instance, the U.S. National Championship, and to have big prize purses for years, and to get some of the top or the fastest ultra runners in the country come to some of the races. And so I've seen that angle, and that's fun for me. But I think I would probably speak for every RD out there. It's probably just as exciting, if not more, to see the final finishers come through like just under the cutoff. And so for a couple of years, I focused on racing Ironman. And so the Ironman, as a prime example, it was a party scene, like late at night, for getting in under the 18-hour cutoff or whatever it was. Like that's when the parties happen. It's night and the lights are on. A lot of people are probably intoxicated at that point. And these people that had just earned their finish for a long day are coming across. And so it's awesome. And so I think whether you're looking at like the front competitive end or the individuals who are out there literally twice as long as the leaders, I think I've really appreciated both of those and everything in between. And so I probably still have my own inherent biases, like anybody that maybe filter through on guests that we have or whatever. But I don't know if it's necessarily changed. I guess part of the intent of Trails Collective was to try to really provide more exposure for more events and individuals, and to really bring us together as like a regional community. And so, all right, sorry, as I talk here, I'm going to back up another step. So years ago, when I think I first started Cayuga Trails, I think we had a couple, like maybe we were like voted like the most scenic race in the country or whatever like that, or like the top 10. And it popped up, I think, in like Trail Runner, maybe Runner's World. And there were a couple of related articles like that over the years. And I think at that time, where initially my first reaction was, oh, that's great. You can plug this for media purposes or marketing or whatever. But then I became very self-conscious about it. I was like, well, this kind of feels awkward. Like it's such a subjective thing, and who's really to say? And really, I don't know how many other races are really out there. And right around that time, I started with a couple back and forth threads with a friend now, but an RD based south of us, and an RD who's very big on making kind of bold claims and statements. And to me, that it always just seemed completely like ridiculous, but I'd want to kind of challenge it with like stats. So if he'd be like, I just said he, so I gave you a hint there. So if he'd say like, we put on the toughest race, like east of the Rockies or something like that, I'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, I know the stats, like I know Whiteface, I know your races we've got. And so in my head, I'm running these numbers, and it was just like, this is what I think was making me feel kind of awkward, was there was nothing to really, I think, back that up or base it on. And so I became more aware of that. And that, I think, shaped also my intent for the Trails Collective, was wanting to find out more about other races and explore or expose or provide exposure for other races that were just as scenic, if Cayuga, or maybe just as tough as Whiteface, or, something like that. And so I guess in that sense, it has opened me up by intent, I guess, along that line.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's awesome. I think, Kaylin, for me, with this perspective, I'll just speak to my own with this whole interview series and podcast. I've gotten to meet some of the most amazing people. I mean, I connected with Ian through the Trails Collective, which in turn has just opened up whole new avenues. I mean, I met Trent Swanson, the legend, down south in Maryland through you guys. For instance, like last week, we got to chat with Hillary Allen, and that was made through a connection in our own trail running community. So I've just been impacted by, I think, trail running as a whole is so big, but then once you really start getting into those subcultures, everyone's connected. There's so many connections. It's cliche, but it is a small world. And I think that's especially true with trail and ultra running. At least that's been my experience so far. But Ian, this is a great, Kaylin, thank you for your question. It's a great springboard to getting into the Trails Collective, which I really want to talk about. Tell us about the Trails Collective. I want to know the whole story about how that started and what your vision is for it moving forward.
Yeah. I started, I think, conceptually, actually putting the pieces together a few years ago. And I was kind of ready to start putting some of it together. And it was a bit sidetracked. Actually, a friend who was my campaign manager during the congressional run reached out after seeing whether I'd potentially be interested in starting to basically a sports CBD line, and not just oral, but also topical. And so we started working on that, and we also to come up with basically like a line of gels and other products that would have CBD based in it. And so that probably took a year or so of going through some of that process. And we had got our processing permit through New York State. We were one of a small number to get that in New York. And we were going through, it turned into looking at a processing facility and then others. And I just got to the point where I kind of had to step back. I just felt like it wasn't feeling quite right or quite good, or communication wasn't there. And so I just pulled back. And at that point, I think spun pretty immediately into trying to actuate my vision for the Trails Collective. And so, again, the hope was to have it be multifaceted, to really, it's trying to, or the hope is to do a lot of different things. So first and foremost, to try to bring us all together and really provide a regional view of trail running. So one of the friends I've made along the way has been Brian Powell. Brian ran Virgil Crest, or what was started as Iroquois Trails, I think like the first or second year, and just stayed in contact. And at the time he was starting Let's Run. There are a couple other friends who own Let's Run, but I Run Far. And it was cool to see him really dig in. And they do some regional coverage, but I think it became like a world-known major player in like the trail and ultra space, and covers world and national events and headlines and speakers and all that. And it's awesome. And again, they do the like This Week in Trail Running for like different regions. But I felt like without really making your core focus a regional or local view, I feel like you don't really have it's not necessarily utilitarian. Like, it may be entertainment purposes and it may be great, but a platform like that is just too big to be able to give, I think, exposure, connection between local or regional events or individuals. And I also wanted the ability to be able to highlight the myriad of individuals and entities which comprise the trail running community. So it may be events and RDs and individuals, but it's also people. If you're joining us tonight, Don Wise is an example of like the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference or Finger Lakes Trail Conference, and as well as clubs and the physical therapists that keep us, try to keep us unbroken, and the run specialty store owners. And there's all these faces and core threads of what is the trail running community. And so it's really still my hope to be able to bring that all together, which is a huge lift to try to make it all sync, and we'll see if we get there. But that would be one part of it. Since I've been in run retail for over 15 years now, or actually probably pushing 20 years with the other experience, I wanted to do more intentional gear reviews, just because I'm around it all the time, and I can also add more to it based on my therapeutic background and weighing in on various angles of injuries and gear and how that all plays in and syncs. I also wanted to have an event calendar just so people could go and create it so RDs could basically claim their race and build it up into their own page or profile. I wanted there to be the forum in there. So I've two friends, Robert and Weldon Johnson, who started and still operate letsrun.com. And even though it's kind of the message boards are just land of carnage and people just, I don't know, it's crazy on those message boards. It's just amazing how active that community is. And so I wanted to try to also create some sort of message board. And I also wanted an alternative to Facebook or whatever. Like, it seems like I had so many friends that had and are active on Facebook, but they don't really want to be. It's just kind of where everybody is, and you almost can't afford not to be. But I think everybody also acknowledges that, man, it can just suck the soul out of you, and it's tough to leave or stay off of, and it's a really kind of nasty, kind of horrible entity in terms of pulling the strings on us and capitalizing us or whatever. And so I wanted to at least have an alternative if people wanted the Facebook and didn't want to be on Facebook. And then also it serves our e-commerce platform for Finger Lakes Running Company. So I was hoping that if I could pull all this together, that there would be a certain amount of individuals, if they're not shopping at their local stores, that maybe would consider us for e-commerce, because we're at least still regional and trying to give back a lot to the trail running community. So maybe you could just kind of earn that support of people choosing to shop with us as opposed to Amazon or Zappos or Running Warehouse or whatever. And then also do the interviews and the live series and to be in touch. And so it's a lot of things to try to accomplish. And I don't know, maybe we'll get there. Maybe it won't, still to be seen. It's still early, but that's kind of what the Trails Collective is trying to do.
It's fantastic. It makes me excited just watching it all kind of unfold and hearing from you. We've chatted about it before. Your vision for it is really exciting to me. I'm visionary as well. So I admire, your kind of go-getter attitude with it, and just how many different goals you have and directions that you want to go. I think it's really awesome.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for your support all along as well. It's been great. To your point, I wasn't aware of Sassquad, or I don't think that you and I were connected. And to your point, I wasn't really connected with Trent before. Tom Hooper is tuning in here this evening. Maybe he's working at the moment, but I didn't know Tom before. I've met so many people as well, which is really the hope and the intention. And so it's been great.
It is, yeah. And your interview podcast series is fantastic. I just listened to, and this is now a little bit dated, but the interview Ellie did with Grace. I always say her last name wrong. Grace Langheim.
Mm-hmm.
Langheim. Yes, I always get that wrong. But it was so awesome. I was listening to it. I had downloaded it when I did the Grand Canyon rim to rim to rim, and I put it on when I was in a little Sufferfest, and it was so great. There's so many awesome podcasts out there, but to have a podcast that, like you said, is regional, where I know Grace, I can connect with, runners one-on-one. It's a really neat experience. Why don't you tell me?
She'll be stoked. Hopefully Grace will be stoked to hear that you chose her in your depths of despair in the midst of the canyon.
I messaged her the next day. I said, just so you know, you were running with me out here in Arizona. But tell us about your team, because you've got other people who are helping you out with this, right?
Ellie started with us from the beginning doing COVID really shook things up. So I think one of the earlier episodes when I first started Trails Collective was I was going to have Dick Vincent out, and we were going to do a piece on escarpment and do a special episode for registration going live, and have people in the studio or the shop here, so to speak. And it was going to be Ellie and I up here with hopefully a certain dynamic happening between us. And that was kind of how it started. And then right around that time, COVID also started. So that just really mixed things up. And so the point earlier when you mentioned FKTs also in the weekly rundowns,
yes,
that's been cool because it's allowed me to, I think, learn a bit more about really spectacular routes that are all over. But I think that wasn't part of the plan. That was COVID set in, and suddenly races weren't happening. And so it was like, well, what are people doing out there? And so some people were still FKTing. And so, it went in that direction. So Ellie was on doing some of the TC interviews early on. And then she made the decision this past semester to start back to school. And so that she wanted to devote her full attention to that. And so she stepped back from doing the Trails Collective. So otherwise, I mean, I have a teammate and a friend, Amelia, that's right now helping with some logos, but that's it. I don't have a team beside that. It's me trying to kind of do all these things and then crowdsourcing where I can. So this past, for instance, probably few months, I've been trying to work on, or not trying, I have been working on some feature article sets that are hopefully coming soon. And so one started, I was going to focus in on states and the trail running communities in those states and the best of trail towns in those states. And so I started with Connecticut because when I guess to Kai Lynn's question earlier, maybe this would be one area. Like, I think I was aware of some of the races in some of these places, but I wasn't aware of just how strong and active some of the running communities were. And so this is one where I was already aware of like the Schnipsit Striders and some of the long-standing races they put on, but it's a really engaged and active place. Like, I think I still had this skewed image in my head of Connecticut being this one big suburban place. And really it's incredible how much trail mileage Connecticut has, and you can be at any town and not too far from a trailhead, and it's a really I don't know if it's huge in numbers, but it's a really vibrant, connected trail scene. And so I had started with Connecticut, and I have a lot of that information down, but I was waiting for a couple other pieces, and then I launched into kind of the best of trail running events series articles that I'm working on right now, and as part of that, it's been a lot of like crowdsourcing. So when you talk about team, it's me reaching out to different, whether it's the New Jersey trail and ultra runners, or the Virginia Happy Trails, or the West Virginia, or trail runners in Mid-Coast Maine. Like, on all these threads, I'm just posting for information of to accumulate basically data on some of these races and just people's opinions. And so I'm really excited to be, I think, fairly close in putting some of these articles out there, and it'll be a number of them. And so I guess the team has been really the community as well when I'm looking for that crowdsourced information.
So when you say you're putting these articles together, are they going to be launched on the Trails Collective page?
Yeah, they'll be launched on the Trails Collective page. So for instance, it first started, I think, one of the first ones was going to be, so I think I was already thinking about it anyway, but then there was another individual who had started, and I don't know whether he's still working on it or whether it's just not going to happen, but I think his URL is like northeast trailrunning.com or like something like that. And early on, I think he had plugged a article on the toughest trail races in the Northeast or something like that. And that was like a prime example of, like, I looked at it and I was like, you captured someone here, but like, what are you basing this on? Like, what are your metrics? Like, what are your, like, okay. And so I basically wanted to do justice to that concept. So it was like, all right, so what's going to be our yardstick? How are we comparing apples to apples? And so just in the context of that one, now I've mapped over, I think, a little over 200, between 200 and 250 courses or trail event courses in the Northeast now. And whether it's just running the map or the GPX file that a race director sent me, or whether it's actually freehanding maps if they didn't have them into my own software based on looking at their topo maps, or the combination kind of thereof, plug them all in. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the GPX files and I'm running them through 3 different decent mapping software programs. And so, like, some of these races, like an example, there's one down in Virginia, for instance, that also made like one of these claims, like it's X difficult or whatever. And they had this elevation figure that in my initial lineup, I was going to be like, this is easily one of the toughest courses in terms of elevation gain, like in the Northeast. But then when I started actually manipulating the data, the software program that they were using for mapping is not even remotely accurate. Like, it'll spit off like way over like high elevation metrics. And so I think it was a prime example of, like, you really got to apples to apples here. And so I took 3 other programs, ran every track through 3 different programs. I took the average of the 3 programs, because there's always going to be one that's high, one that's going to be low. And then I divided it by the distance for the average elevation gain. And then I also factored in seasonality of the race, technicality of the course. And then when it really started splitting hairs, then I spent a decent amount of time on some of them, basically finding which entrant ran multiple of these races and where was their time faster, and like which were slower. And then when it got even deeper, it was like, well, and this was interesting too. Okay, to Kylan's question, I guess I'm finding other ways. Like for instance, in the Pennsylvania scene, which is probably the most active and biggest trail scene in and Loomis. Yeah, that a boy. I'll comment on that in a second. He just commented. And I didn't even have to say the name, and you knew what I was talking about. All right. But yeah. So this is going to be fun once I release him to see the comments on here too. All right. But the Pennsylvania scene, one of the most active trail running scenes in our region. Heiner is going down this weekend with 1,200 runners. Just huge, really engaged scene. It was interesting. What I found was in a lot of these races, like individuals aren't necessarily crossing over between different like event companies races. So they're siloed into like this kind of sub community, but they're not necessarily crossing. And if they do, they're not usually in the same distances. And so what I then had to do was I had to find basically the race in common between, all right, so if he's still on here, I had to find the race in common between Ryan Thorpe and Devang. And if they weren't in the same race, I had to then find the race that they were in together and then backtrack out into these other races to see then how they stacked up in terms of times. And so I was really trying to do as much justice as I could to these races to really make it an apples to apples kind of equation. Sorry, I feel like I'm just running on and talking too fast, but
no, this is great. I mean, that's amazing, the level of detail you're going into.
And so, all right. And so to Greg Loomis's, so Cloud Splitter so slow because 30 to 40 stream crossings, right? And that's something I can't see, right, in the metrics. What I did find with Cloud Splitter, and Greg was probably my first exposure to ultra running. He was one of my teammates at Ithaca College. Greg is right now, one of his life goals, which he may hit in short order here, is to try to finish 100 milers. He's just finished, I think, his 150th ultra a couple weekends ago. But I think he was my first exposure to ultra, and he's been really embedded in the Virginia scene for some time. And he was kind of that early generation, I think, that's just kind of kept going. But that's something that I can't tell. I mean, I can look at topos, but I can't see 30 to 40 stream crossings. And so when I release these articles, there'll be some, I think, kickback, and then I'll be able to shuffle things based on feedback. But Greg, the other part of it though, Greg, is that Cloud Splitter also, this has really surprised me. And so some of these routes, it wasn't just looking at the elevation metrics, but I was actually looking at the maps as I was mapping in them. And so I was surprised to find just how much road, whether it be paved or whether it be park service road, that Cloud Splitter has in the course. And so I think the initial Cloud Splitter course before they had to move it was more technical, but when they moved it, it became a little less so. And so I'm also weighing the impact or technicality of having roads in the course. So it's been really fun, but that's just one angle. There's the toughest trail races in the U.S. And now initially where I was trying to find just the toughest per mile, I realized that I couldn't do it for all distances. And so I had to then fragment it out into distances. So now I split it. So for instance, like in the 50K division, I've ranked, I think it's like the top 35, I think 50Ks in terms of the toughness, so to speak. And I had some sort of cutoff on, I think it was whatever X amount of feet per gain. And obviously there's more 50Ks than 50. I covered quite a chunk. And so every division I went through this, and then I moved on to most scenic, and for most scenic being subjective, then I was just asking for people's opinions. I'd post it in Virginia Happy Trails, or I'd ask Amy and Brian Rizecki, knowing they've been kind of been all over the place, like what's their opinion on most scenic in Massachusetts? Or I think I asked you early on what's the most scenic in New Jersey. And so I have those plugged, and I'll work on the biggest party scenes and the biggest in terms of numbers. And I'm just finishing the flat and fast category. And so there'll be all these spin-offs, but hopefully it encompasses a really big data set for Northeast trail running.
Oh my goodness, that's going to be such an awesome resource for runners all over. I mean, just to be able to click on that article or wherever you're posting it. And I know there's going to be a bunch of people who are like, all right, I want to see the hardest. Now I'm going to start looking up those registration pages.
Yeah, I'd hope so. I feel a little bit bad because there's so many races out there that just aren't going to. There's even been some of yours, Kim. Like I feel bad. Then I have these personal relationships, right? Because I'm like, Trent, if you're tuning in, like Trent or Kim, like you guys have amazing, and you're establishing like amazing communities around you and putting on really wonderful events. But some of your events may not necessarily like fall into these like categories. So then so I feel bad for all of the events that I'll miss, but maybe eventually we'll find a category for all of them. But there'll be a lot that I'll obviously not have in there.
Well, we won't hold it against you too long. We'll hold it around a little bit, but not too long. Awesome. Well, we're getting down to the end here. So if you have questions, you can drop them in the live chat, and I can read them to Ian. We're going to do some rapid fire here, though, in the meantime, and we'll see. We'll check in on the chat if we get any other questions. This is a question we ask all of our guests, the most important one. Do you believe in Sasquatch?
Yeah, wasn't there I think I kind of believe in like the Yeti. I mean, does that kind of qualify as like the Sasquatch? I mean, they're kind of related, right? I guess I think they're cousins. I think I'm still a little unclear there. Who was it? There was a mountaineer who always, I think, believed in the Yeti, and it's really amazing. Maybe somebody's watching. Short answer, maybe. I believe in you, Kim. I believe in you. Does that count?
That counts. Thanks again.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. What is the greatest movie of all time?
Clay Pigeons.
There we go. Okay. Unexpected. All right. Let's see. Next question. What is your personal favorite trail? If you could only pick one, what's your favorite one?
Like favorite trail of any place I've been?
Yep. You've been to a lot of trails.
I have been to a lot of trails. I think you're right. I mean, I was about to say whatever my answers be, it's not going to be a just answer, but I guess that's part of the fun, right? It doesn't matter. Like I just have to answer. Yeah. I think that probably the trails above where I used to live on Oahu, which is like up on the Hurt course. And occasionally I just go up there and do night runs on my own. And it was such a visceral place. You have like the warmth, and you'd have the humidity of the like jungle, so to speak. And you'd have the smells of these really fragrant rather, like flowers or like papaya that would be like smashed on the trail. You'd have the occasional stir and sound when you disturb or spook the wild boar that were up there, which would freak you out as well. But then you'd also have just the lights of Honolulu that would just, when you came around a certain turn and like over a hump, it would just kind of open up in front of you, and you'd see this just island kind of cityscape glistening, and you'd still see the coast. There's so much light there even at night. So I would probably say that section of trail and that specific time.
That's awesome. Yeah, I spent a semester of college on Oahu, and this was before I was a trail runner. Man, I would give anything to relive that as a trail runner, because I think I missed out on so many amazing trails on the island.
Yep. Yeah, it's really quite wonderful.
Yeah, totally. All right, we have a couple more questions here. What is your favorite trail running shoe of all time? And it can be a model that's not being made anymore, because I'm sure you run in a lot of different shoes.
Yeah, I do, and I've actually been starting to accumulate some of my favorites historically, just because they're kind of gone and they're kind of interesting kind of talking points. There's like one, I don't think I ever owned it, but as an example, there's one of the original Adidas trail shoes here, which is the Adidas Marathon Trail Original, on the tongue, still made in West Germany. So there are some impressive ones, but I think looking at some of these old shoes of even like 10, 15, 20 years ago, like I remember when some of the shoes were like new and they seemed so like awesome when they first came out, but comparatively speaking, they weren't. They were like were heavy, or they were rigid, or they were like really like thick materials. And so I have a tough time, I think, looking back and saying that was like the best trail shoe, because I feel like shoes just keep getting lighter and more comfortable. And for the most part, it's like this evolution. And in some extent, you can't go back. So like when I think back of like cool shoes when they first came out, I think like maybe like the Montrail Masai, I thought was a really cool shoe at the time. It seemed really like minimal in the upper, and it was really like pretty slick. But I don't know. And like now that I'm wear testing so many shoes, it's tough. I don't know. Even if I should just pin it down just for the purposes of this, just to have fun and say, this is I don't know if I can. There's just so many shoes and so many different feels that I don't even know if I can answer it just for the fun of like answering right now. So I'm surrounded by shoes, and a lot of them are great for like different reasons. So I'm going to fail in answering that question.
That's all right. That's all right. We got some good backstory on it. This might be an equally as hard question. We'll field it from Ryan Thorpe. After cataloging all these races, which one are you most looking forward to running for the first time? That's probably a tough question too.
I don't think so. Yeah, because I've really dug into a lot of these races, and so I guess I've got to be good at something. Like now I'm aware of like a lot of races that are out there, and so even in this series of articles that I'm putting together right now, like I even embedded as much as I could find like YouTube video on the events or the courses. So if there wasn't one on the event, if I could find like a mountain biker that streamed like riding through these trails or whatever, like I wanted to give people a sense of what the course was all about. And so there I was also able to, I think, cue in and watch a bunch of these courses in action too. But my immediate reaction to Ryan's question is probably the Mansfield Double Up up in Vermont, followed by probably, if he's still on here, Tom Hooper's Kismet Cliff Run.
And what state is that in?
That's New Hampshire.
New Hampshire. Awesome. All right. New England shout outs right there. Okay. Do we have any more questions in our chats here? I know they're on multiple pages. We'll just do one last sweep here. I think that's about it, right, Ian? Are you seeing any others?
No, that it doesn't always bring them in real time. Unfortunately, some will be missed, but I don't see any.
Okay. Awesome. Well, that hour flew by. Again, I apologize for the late start to all you guys who are tuning in, but thanks for bearing with us. And Ian, 5 stars for troubleshooting on the fly, getting this going. Sure. Thank you. Let's wrap up. Tell everyone who's listening and who might be listening to the podcast in a week or two, how can they learn more about all your different entities, Trails Collective and Newt Racing? Where can they find out more, Finger Lakes Running Company? I'm still so the biggest, you can go to trailscollective.com. So I'm trying to structure Trails Collective where, again, you don't have to have a social media account. It's kind of an old school website where you can actually go to the URL, and so it's accessible by everybody. I'm also comfortably stuck in being, I guess, an old guy now where I'm just on Facebook. And even though I have Instagram, I don't think I've ever used Instagram. I have Twitter, but I think I only used it during the, congressional campaign a little bit. So I'll post to Facebook, and I'm often responding there just because I have to be on there, even though I don't really want to be on there. So you can find me on Facebook. You can reach out to me on Facebook under Trails Collective, Red Newt Racing, Finger Lakes Running Company, my own personal page. You can find me usually in person at the shop, and I'm going to try to make my way through as many of these races as I can take in. So any of those avenues. Awesome. Well, I want to give a personal thank you to you. You've done so much for the trail running community, and especially for us, you've given us a lot of exposure here with Sasquatch Trail Running. We don't do a ton of advertising, I would say. A lot of it is word of mouth and then through social media and our website. So you've given us a lot of really nice plugs. And I know I'm not the only race director that feels that way. So it is very, very much appreciated.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to learn more about Sassquad Trail Running, you can get on our website, sasquatchtrailrunning.com, and you can catch up on all the latest episodes of our podcast. anywhere podcast is streaming, Google Play, Apple, Spotify, wherever. Just type in Sassquad Trail Runners, and you can tune in on your next run. You can queue it up. So, Ian, thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Kim, for the opportunity.
All right, guys, until we see you again, keep it squatchy.
All right.